they can no longer control the price because of what's happening to the dollar, because they're always looking at it from that point of view. Is the dollar going down? I don't think any central banks think in terms of silver as being a monetary metal. I mean, in the past, it has been a monetary metal, particularly after we came off silver standards. It's been legal exchange basically for small amounts. So that I think is the extent of the relationship. I'm not saying that silver shouldn't be regarded as a monetary metal. I think it should be to a great extent. So central banks, I think, will continue to buy gold. But you raise an interesting point, because under the laws which appoints the People's Bank of China as the sole manager of the state's gold reserves, that legislation also said exactly the same thing about silver, the state's silver. So in other words, it is seen by the Chinese as part of a, if you like, a wider foreign exchange remit for the People's Bank of China, which actually makes sense, because if you think back, China was on a silver standard, I think, until relatively late, something like 1968, I think. So that's an interesting point as to whether the People's Bank has actually been manipulating the price of silver in the past, and whether its policy has changed. I think its policy has changed. I think they've gone from importing silver doré at the lowest possible price, accumulating silver in hidden reserves, just as they've done with gold. I think they've now gone into a policy of, well, the trouble is that we're now got to push so much silver out to control the market that actually we'd rather hoard it than do that, and we'll just ride the higher price. Many years ago, I think it was over a decade ago, I had a speaking gig in New York, and it was one of these conferences where I think there was something like 20 odd silver miners and exploration companies exhibiting at this conference. And at the time, there was a lot of controversy. The thought was that JP Morgan were manipulating the market, and Blythe Masters was played by everybody, this wicked witch from England and all the rest of it. The interesting thing is that just before this, she had appeared on, I think it was, I can't, one of the big US TV stations, and made it absolutely clear that JP Morgan did not take positions for themselves in the silver market. What they would do is they would deal on behalf of their clients. So that sort of said, okay, right. Now, Blythe Masters is not an idiot. She's not going to stand up and lie. People in that position do not tell lies, I can tell you. They may be economical with the truth, but they do not tell lies. So I wasn't into that conspiracy theory. Anyway, so I thought, right, I better go and do a bit of homework on this. So I asked all these miners and exploration companies, all in turn, and they came up with exactly the same answer to the same question. The question I asked them is, how do you turn your silver into cash? Because you've obviously got to pay mining costs, energy and miners' salaries and all the rest of it. And they all said the same thing. They said, a chap from Glencore comes along and he assesses the value of the doré. It's then shipped off, and we are paid immediately by a bank, who I assume in this case was JP Morgan, because they would be working with, we're talking about big corporates working together, yeah? Mm-hmm. I then asked, well, where do you think, where does it get shipped off to? So, well, we don't know. It's not our business. We're just paid, as soon as the assessment is made and it leaves the site. But we assume it would be China. Now, that did make sense, because at the time, refineries in Canada, for example, were being closed and so on. And basically refining silver is, rather like refining gold, is a pretty dirty business. It's not something that you want to upset the environmentalists with and all the rest of it. And you probably does the government produce all sorts of regulations to make it difficult anyway. So, yeah, China was basically importing gold and silver doré in huge quantities, refining it, and guess what? Never leaves. But what the Chinese were doing was they were hedging this stuff to suppress the price through COMEX. And guess who was doing the hedging? Our friends JP Morgan. They were not dealing off their own book. They were hedging on behalf of the Chinese government. That's the key thing. So this is how they control the price. And they've been doing this for years, absolutely years. So, just occasionally it sort of ran away, sort of some sort of speculative bubble takes it up to $50 or something, but they, you kill it quite quickly after that. That's fine. And, look, I've been a broker and I know how these things work. The way I would work it with the Chinese, and this would suit the Chinese, is we have a quarterly meeting to discuss what we're actually going to do, how much is going to flow through, what our price targets are, and all the rest of it. And okay, JP Morgan, go to it. So that's what happened. Right. Anyway, I noticed that in 2023, China exported quite a lot of silver. I can't remember the figure, something like 123 million ounces, something like that. I mean, it doesn't sound huge. But amazingly, it exported it to places like Singapore, Hong Kong, London. And these are not really known as places where, photovoltaic cell production, which is the main demand now, also military demand, is really, as part of those sort of centres. I mean, they're financial centres. So this was obviously being pushed into the market to try and control the price.
Yeah.
There were exports the following year in 2024, last year. I think the same sort of thing, but not going into financial centres. There's obviously a shortage globally anyway of silver. We know that from the Silver Institute's numbers. And I think what's happened is that the Chinese have now taken the view that they've got silver on board. They can no longer control the price because of what's happening to the dollar, because they're always looking at it from that point of view. Is the dollar going down? Yep. They can no longer take silver down with the dollar. So they're sitting on their stock just like that.
Waiting.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing they can do about it. So this is a fascinating situation. It's causing huge, great problems in other markets, particularly the platinum market. Big backwardations. And the thing that's fascinating, there's a guy called David Jensen who's done some work on this, and I think someone else, a fellow called Davis, I think. What they've exposed is that China and America have been stockpiling platinum to the point where there's no liquidity left in London, in the London open counterpart. So, you've now got it, if you like, a sort of, it's not quite like the nickel explosion. That was a slightly different thing. I mean, the nickel problem on the LME was one of incompatibility of delivery. The big short was someone in the nickel business in China, but they didn't have nickel in deliverable form, so they couldn't settle the contract. You look at the silver stocks on COMEX, and they're up at a record. It's all been sucked elsewhere. Because the other side of the story, and it's more true in gold than it is in silver, is that you've got stands for delivery, and we don't know what the hell's going on there. Who's taking delivery? It's this stands for delivery isn't price sensitive or anything. I mean, it wasn't meant to happen, actually. I mean, the whole idea of a futures market is you use it as a hedging tool, not as something to take delivery. But I think so far this year, something like 860 tons of gold has been delivered and about 8,300 tons of silver.
Wow.
These are very significant flows, and presumably the stock of silver sitting in COMEX is all waiting to be delivered, if you like. Some of it already committed, because obviously standing for delivery doesn't actually mean that you take delivery. But for users of silver, I mean, what do you do? Do you, if you're an industrial user, do you sort of, just take it and store it in your warehouse or something. No, you don't. You leave it. You leave it in, the COMEX warehouses, which where at least it's secure and all the rest of it and insured. You don't want to take delivery until you actually want to use it. So I think a lot of that is just accumulating on that basis. Gold is more interesting because I guess, and this is a guess, that it's some of the central banks, some of the sovereign wealth funds, and so on and so forth, trying to cover their position. I wonder also, and this is just a thought out of the blue, as to whether some central banks who have leased gold in the past and found that it's just disappeared into the market are trying to cover their position because they don't want to be found out. I mean, if we're coming to the end of the fiat currency system, if you're worried about the future of the dollar, then obviously you've got to start worrying about how much gold you've actually got. Have you got it secured? And what happened to all that stuff you leased, which never really came back? You've probably still got an IOU floating around somewhere. So what does this do to the liquidity in the gold market? I think that the liquidity in the gold market is gone because the whole of the forward LBMA forward dealing system, and also to an extent COMEX, really does depend on the availability of physical to oil the wheels of the paper market. And that has always come from leasing, and it's sort of, it's the Bank of International Settlements dealing and, taking gold from, say, the Bank of Portugal because it's got a collateral, then using it in the market, hypothecating it, rehypothecating it, and so on and so forth. Same with the Bank of England. Upon which point, wasn't it fascinating that back in March, the Bank of England reported that there was a 6-week queue to withdraw gold from his vaults. He couldn't handle the volume. Until that time, basically what a leasing central bank had been told was, don't worry, that what will happen is that we will just do a book entry so that possession of the gold over a period of the lease will move to X. Okay. So that's now, so in other words, it was a book entry transfer system within the vaulting arrangements. Okay, I'm happy with that. That's absolutely fine. But now, the people that we've leased this to are taking it out. And it's gone. Are we going to get it back? And so you can see how this informs central banks who have been storing gold, not just in London, but also in Paris, and also in the Bank of, the Federal Bank of New York. Where's our gold? We better get this under control. We don't want to do any more leasing. It's too uncertain. And furthermore, we need to repatriate it. I understand that Croatia, which is a pretty small player in this, has got sufficiently worried that it's getting all its gold back. I don't know where the hell it's storing it, probably under the central bank governor's bed. But this is a real problem. And of course, it does mean that the liquidity which drives the paper market has gone. Consequences yet to unfold.